to begin, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and what your role is at the temple or in your Jewish community in general?
Sure. Well, I've been on the board at Temple Israel for several years now, and I'm the vice president of the ritual practice. Until this January, I'd been a librarian at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. So I'd been there for a little over 20 years, and I'd been on the Cincinnati campus for about 10 years previous to that. I did half my growing up in Connecticut and the other half outside of Chicago in Downers Grove, and the other half I'm still working at.
Cool. So that's actually great because it seems like then you've been to many different places or geographic locations in the United States. Would you say that you've been like pretty involved in all the different Jewish communities in the various locations?
Yeah, when we lived in Connecticut, I remember going to Sunday school and, after school programs. Me and my brothers were pretty young, so I don't remember doing a whole lot other than that. I remember my parents regularly going to Friday night services. Outside Chicago, we were very involved in the congregation. I was active in youth group and was president for a while. My parents were both very active. My father, don't remember, I know he was on the board. I don't remember if he was president or treasurer or one or the other. My mom was involved in sisterhood. So we were very active. And our youth group was active in SIFTY, the Chicago Federation of Temple Youth. So that was a conglomeration of youth groups from all over the Chicago region that got together for programming.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So on the topic of anti-Semitism, there was a book I read earlier this year when I did a research paper in a writing class on the topic of anti-Semitism and how it correlates here in how it comes up here in the United States as a result of what happens in Israel. And one of the books I read was from a professor named Robert Wistrich, who coined anti-Semitism as the longest hatred, sort of the idea that it's been around for time immemorial, for millennia, whether it was from a religious basis, as we saw more during the Middle Ages with the Christian blood libels, or whether it's more through a racialized lens, as we saw during the Holocaust. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, is this topic of anti-Semitism and how it comes up in the modern context. So can you tell me, without sort of yet going into too much detail, if you or the various communities that you've been a part of have directly or indirectly experienced anti-Semitism?
I don't really remember that much from the Connecticut part of my life in terms of anti-Semitism, but in Chicago, while I was in youth group, so sometime in my teenage years, now I'm spacing out if it was the Ku Klux Klan or a Nazi movement was going to be marching through Skokie, which was a northern suburb of Chicago with a heavily Jewish population, and especially a lot of Holocaust survivors had lived there. Right. So everyone was understandably very upset, and our youth group did programming around this, and SIFTY did a lot of programming around this. At some point while we lived there, we had a swastika painted on our garage door. So those were the two major things that I remember.
Right. So you said the swastika was painted on your garage. So it was pretty well known that you came from a Jewish family. Or it was a Jewish
apparently
household.
Yeah, I mean, we were actively Jewish. We put up Hanukkah decorations right. in the windows. I was very aware that there were only 2 Jewish families in our elementary school, as far as I know, in my junior high or middle school, and I think there was one other in my high school. So out of a school of, I don't know, 3,500 people, I only knew of right. 2 other Jewish families.
Yeah, and was this the first this march through Skokie, was this the first sort of experience that you had with anti-Semitism, or even just was this the first time that you kind of realized that being a Jew made you different in any certain way?
Oh, no, I'd been very aware of that from really early on. Whenever we had projects at school for making Christmas presents, my mom would storm the school and say, you need to have them be more generic or winter or, other options, that you can't just have a Christmas project. And for the winter concerts, that were all Christmas music, and especially a lot of religious Christmas music, again, my mom was at the school saying, you can't require kids to sing this, or I shouldn't say require, because they would say, well, she doesn't have to sing. But if the whole class is standing up there
Right.
and you just don't sing, that puts the kid in a very awkward moment too. So I knew from as soon as I entered the public schools that we were different.
Yeah. Do you have any experiences with anti-Semitism in like the Long Beach area or Orange County?
Well, I remember when let me tell you one other story in between. When I was in college, someone that I had gotten friendly with, who was from a very small town in rural Illinois, very gingerly asked where my horns were, because he had heard that. So it wasn't so much that he was anti-Semitic, he was just
the tropes.
That's what he had heard, and he asked it pretty respectfully and hesitantly, right. But yeah, it really caught me off guard. So here in Long Beach, the Westboro Church had protested at the synagogue, at one of the schools, not the high school that my kids went to, but they knew a lot of friends there, at my place of work, at Hebrew Union College, at the JCC, where the family spent a lot of time. So that was pretty disheartening. And, I think in later years, this is more kind of overhearing my children's conversations with friends. And from what my daughter was reporting was happening on campus and at UC Santa Barbara, is that Judaism and being Israeli, the identities were getting smushed together more and more. And so, Jews aren't allowed to talk about anything going bad in the world because we're mistreating the Palestinians. Right. And so there's just no separation of the very painful position of Israelis and Palestinians and what it is to be a Jew in the world, not an Israeli. So those two have been, forget the formal word, smushed together.
Right, for sure. I think for me, like definitely in the modern context, I think a lot of anti-Semitism is not super explicit, but it does, as you said, it kind of appears in tropes. And especially now with the Israel-Palestine conflict, it like for me, it's kind of, I like personally would label myself as more of a liberal Jewish American. That's kind of when I'm asked about my identity, that's kind of how I express myself. I'm a liberal Jewish American. And this conflict in Israel-Palestine has been super, I guess, interesting for me to see how some of my identity, aspects of my identity or my labels have sort of come into conflict with one another. For example, there's been plenty, there's been a few more liberal Congress people, Democrats who have gone on the record and saying some things that are a little questionable about Israel, particularly during the height of the Israel-Palestine conflict. I guess it's probably like towards the beginning of the year. In terms of labels for yourself, do you have any in particular that you'd be comfortable sharing here, like whether it's Jewish, American, female?
Yeah, all of those. Jewish, American, liberal, lesbian, wife, mother, librarian, chaser of butterflies, Um,
Yeah. So then this kind of leads into my next question is, when you faced anti-Semitism, do you see any of these identity traits coming into conflict with one another?
I mean, I guess for many people, they have the idea that Orthodox Judaism or even Hasidic Judaism represents all of Judaism. So sometimes I've been kind of accused of defending Judaism when Judaism, is so repressive of women and kind of open knowledge and all that and outreach.
Right.
So I think, there's a little conflict there. And then I need to explain Hasidic Judaism does
Right.
not encompass all of Judaism. There are all these different branches. And in terms of definitely when I've spoken with other liberals and people on the left, many people on the left are very sympathetic to the Palestinian point of view. And it just seems that maybe society's always been this way, but we're just so black and white right now.
Right.
So and people have a hard time seeing that this is a nuanced problem, that it's not just simple of Israel good, Palestinians bad, or Palestinians good, Israel bad, that there is an in between there, and that the only way we'll be able to find peace is to, live in that gray area, and acknowledge that there have been problems on both sides, that there are good people on both sides, and all the people in the region deserve to live, safely.
Right. No, yeah, I definitely like share that view, and I've talked to some people, like some of my friends who do hold the more black and white view of Palestinians good, Israeli, and like the Israeli government bad. I try to, it is a nuanced issue. There's political issues at play, there's geography at play, there's religion at play. So yeah, like you said, it's definitely a very nuanced issue. So thank you for sharing that. Retracing a little bit to your particular experiences with anti-Semitism, did you find your Jewish identity affected at all? And for instance, like, have you ever, I guess, like in the Skokie incident, were you hesitant to express your Judaism in public after that, for fear of backlash or physical harm or mental harm or anything?
No. I think that partially through that and partially through Holocaust studies, I've realized that the haters are going to hate whether you flaunt your Judaism or not, whether you practice your Judaism or not, whether you look like a Jew or not, whether you believe like a Jew or not. So,
Right.
I may as well be myself, be proud of my Jewish background, and keep on living Jewishly, because, hiding does not actually save you from anything.
Right. Right. My next question is, in the wake of 2020 and the previous year, 2021, we saw many social justice movements emerge, or even some have been around for a while, but really rose to prominence, namely Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and things of the like. Do you think anti-Semitism in this day and age, and there's no wrong answer here, but do you think anti-Semitism deserves the same mainstream attention, or at least some mainstream attention, similarly to these other social justice movements do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely say for the record that Black Lives Matter, that, we have terrible social injustice, economically, socially, in the justice system and education system and the job market. So there are definitely major problems that need addressing. But I don't think it's really helpful to compare tragedies, to compare how bad off we are. When we're targeted for a hate crime, we deserve the attention of saying we were targeted for a hate crime, and not that other people are more worthy of the attention. So definitely Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Movement matters, but ours does too. And I think that statistically, we're overrepresented in terms of hate crimes. We're more of a target than Blacks or other religious groups, if I'm remembering correctly.
No, yeah, I think you're right. I think when I wrote my research paper a couple months ago, there was some Pew Research Center said there's something like about like 6,500 incidents of anti-Semitism per year, which seems crazy. And but even considering that, I don't hear many or most of them. So 6,500. I mean, that's a lot of anti-Semitism that occurs. And I definitely agree with you too that sometimes it's like comparing apples to oranges. Like the comparison doesn't need to be made. So thank you for that view. My last question is this. So earlier in the interview, I outlined what Professor Wistrich and how said and how he labeled anti-Semitism as being the longest hatred, being that it's flourished for millennia, from religious to racial hatred and coming up in various forms, whether it's harassment or genocide. Do you think it's possible or necessary to put effort into curbing anti-Semitism in this day and age?
Absolutely.
Okay, and to follow up, and this is going to be a very broad and maybe even an impossible question because nobody's been able to figure this out. But if so, how? How can we put a stop to anti-Semitism in this? And the reason that I ask, and I know it's a really hard question to answer, but part of the reason that we're doing this fellowship is to bring unique perspectives on how to solve a seemingly long-lasting and never-ending issue. So I kind of am curious on what your perspective is on how we as a public can do our part to eradicate anti-Semitism.
Wow, great question. I mean, certainly education should be part of it. More coverage in the newspapers and the news about not only when hate crimes occur, but about good things going on in the Jewish community. When the holidays come around, when good things happen in Israel, there have been a lot of amazing inventions that can be brought up. And I don't know if that means I'm equating Israel with Jews now, but I think we also need to get the churches in on this. A lot of it was caused by the churches incorrectly saying that Jews killed Jesus. And so we still have that stigma 2,000 years later.
Right.
And I think that, we always seem to make a convenient scapegoat. So I think that improving the social and economic state in the United States for everyone will mean that there's less need of a scapegoat. So if everyone's doing better, then they won't be looking for anyone to throw hatred at.
Right. So to begin, without going into too much detail, can you just tell me if you or your community has experienced anti-Semitism either directly or indirectly?
Over what period of time? Just in recent times, or I guess somewhat recent. I could probably only speak to.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of if it's something you've been facing your whole life or something more recent.
Right. Yeah, I did not grow up in Long Beach. I came to Long Beach as a professional when I started working at the Temple. So that was in 2000. Previous to that, I was living in West LA when I was in graduate school. Did a stint in Colorado for college. And then before that, I was living in Orange County for high school in Santa Ana, part of the Tustin School District. I feel like my years in Long Beach have been pretty clear of anti-Semitic incidents. I mean, I can think of a couple, but in my mind, that's not very many over a 22-year period. And I feel really lucky to be able to say that. I think, I emailed you those pictures or whatever I could find, or the summary of the email or some of the incident when we had swastika graffitied on the front of the building. That was right after we remodeled. So that was particularly upsetting because it felt like an affront to our, to our building, to our place in the community. The way that group works, they like travel, they warn communities that are coming and they show up. So like the police, everyone's notified in advance. So we knew they were coming. And that kind of, in my mind, almost backfired on them because our local community rallied in such a meaningful way that we just kind of, we rose above it. Right. And all the years that I've worked with kids, with teens, with adults, I will occasionally hear stories, but I would say they're pretty far and few between. I think it's pretty amazing. I feel like the thing I hear most, and I'm not sure if this was your experience in, growing up in Los Al, but there are these casual jokes that are made, in the informal settings. And occasionally I'll still hear my own personal kids, mention that someone will make a comment and everyone's sort of laughs, and the Jewish kids laugh also. To me, that's the most recurring thing. I wouldn't say it's rampant, but I do hear those stories. Like when we ask teenagers, middle schoolers, high schoolers about their experiences with anti-Semitism, that's what I hear most. Oh, jokes are made at school, but they're not so bad and everyone's laughing. I'm not sure, Jacob, if it's if the lack of anti-Semitic acts in Long Beach is, I would like to think it's a reflection of the diversity in our city. When I know you grew up in Los Al, so maybe it's a slightly different experience, but in Long Beach, there's such incredible diversity, and I think it's something that most residents here, hold in high regard. A couple of things that have happened nationally that have been anti-Semitic, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, or in Texas. At least the leadership of the city, political leaders or religious leaders, they've reached out to us, to ask us if we need support or if we need protection or whatever. So that's nice. I'm not sure if the general community is so aware, and I may sort of be going into your next question, but this is something that I think about a lot, is when these big incidents happen nationally, because you refer to is the media reflecting that, speaking about them more. I'm not sure if the media speaks about them enough, and I also don't know if they get the attention that they need from our acquaintances. Whereas when there's something, something else that happens to a different community, and you've got everybody changing their Facebook profile pictures or whatever, the stuff in the synagogue, who wasn't a shooter, he was the kidnapper, the hostage situation. The only people that I saw on Facebook or talking about it were Jews. And to me, that was hurtful. It just was absent. To me, the lack of discussion of it was notable. And I think also, Jacob, we're really, as Reform Jews who mostly choose, I shouldn't generalize, but who mostly choose to integrate fully into the secular world. I think we experience it less than our Orthodox friends and family members, right? We don't necessarily look outwardly Jewish. Unless unless we are choosing to wear kippah or tzitzit, and Reform Jews certainly could do that. It's just not as common.
Can you speak to anything about your labels and how they have or have not come into conflict with one another?
I guess at some point along, my journey, I was able to come to a conclusion that I can love Israel and not agree with all of her choices. And so for me, like I feel comfortable saying that I'm a Zionist and I'm a liberal Jew. And I have a commitment to Israel, but I also don't always think what they're doing there is right. I guess I would say sometimes being an American and a Zionist is occasionally, I guess, maybe depending on who's in office, right? Or which, the way the Secretary of State or the president is leaning, like that can be hard for me at times. As a reform educator, like I have an obligation to learn about all sides to what's going on there, to give our students information, and then for them to be able to reach conclusions eventually on their own. For the most part, I don't see many things in conflict with one another. Even though I can handle a discussion about Israel's political choices or accusations of apartheid, I can handle those discussions. I really don't like them because for a lot of reasons I don't like them, but like I tend to lead with my heart, right? And I love Israel. But I also I know that some things that go on there are racist or inappropriate. So, could I see a conflict between like sort of the academic side of me and the feeling side? Maybe a little bit, but I tend to lead with my heart.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. That's a really good point. And I try to keep that in mind too. Like I support the creation and existence of Israel, especially coming out of the Holocaust, and not just the Holocaust, but millennia of persecution, and of course what it says in our religious text that one day the Jewish people will return to Palestine, if you will. But at the same time, it's okay to criticize Netanyahu or other leaders who we don't view their actions as acceptable.
Right.
On a personal level.
Yeah, and it's also okay to recognize all the amazing things that are happening in Israel. And there are so many amazing things, right? I mean, there's so much kindness and social work that's being done and incredible treatment of immigrants. I mean, there's amazing things that are going on there, not to mention all the science and the academic work.
Right.
So I guess I try to raise those up.
Right, for sure. My last two questions are kind of difficult, and I just really want to express there's no like right or wrong answer. I don't really have an answer myself, but they're interesting to ask nonetheless. So the next question is, in the wake of 2020 and 21, we saw several social justice movements either emerge or rise to prominence, such as Black Lives Matter, such as Stop Asian Hate. Do you think anti-Semitism here at home deserves the same mainstream attention?
Let's see, that's an interesting question. I think I would say that I think it deserves more attention. I'm not sure that the issues that the Jewish community face equate with those of racial intolerance. And maybe I'm looking at the world too, with through rose-colored glasses, but I feel like we don't experience the same levels of hate and intolerance. I also think that we are fortunate enough to have the respect and the resources to be able to combat some of this, not on our own, but we're able to address some of this in a way that perhaps groups with lower socioeconomic populations maybe they just don't have the resources. So
right.
I feel like as a Jew, I'm obligated to, and I want to help raise up those other ethnic groups. And that's why I would say that I'm proud to be part of those other movements.
Right.
Would it be great if, well, Black Lives Matter, that's also controversial in itself, right? In terms of their statements about Israel but Do I think that other racial groups or religious groups should also stand with the Jews more? Yeah, for sure. I do think that. And I think, but I just guess I don't think the need is as great.
Right.
But the flip side of what I'm saying is sometimes I think we perpetuate our own, or we perpetuate the stereotype or something that we don't need that help. Like we don't need the help, right? We don't need that support because we have the resources, we have the education, we have the confidence or whatever, we have the connection, the political connections.
Or even just, or sorry to cut you off. I'm just, a lot of Jews even say, oh, we've been dealing with this for longer than anybody else has. So we've got it.
We got it, right. And that's, there's like some truth to that, but it's never good to be alone.
Right. Thank you. My last question is, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, given that anti-Semitism has been perpetuated and has flourished for millennia, from era to era, from religious to racial hatred, do you think it's necessary in this day and age to put resources, to put effort into eradicating it? And if so, and I know this is kind of like an impossible question, but given that it's lasted for so long, but do you have any sort of unique perspective on how we could do our part, or the general public could do their part to eradicating anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I do think it's important that we continue to put resources into it, because there's always another generation to come, right? So I think we have to keep educating, and education costs money. I think we're despite millennia of anti-Semitism, we are a fixing people, right? We're gonna keep at it. And we're really lucky to be living in 2022, where anti-Semitism is, I hear what you're saying, the numbers are on the rise, but it's pretty good to be a Jew in 2022 in the United States of America. It's pretty good. Yeah. But pockets of hatred arise everywhere around the world, and including the United States. And so, I mean, God willing, we will be able to live, for the next 120 years and not see a particularly difficult chapter for the Jews. But maybe in 200 years or 300 years, and I guess you never really know when it's going to reemerge. And so, yeah, I would advocate for our continuing to put resources toward it.
My name is Noah Letterman, and I'm an 11th grader at Tarbut B'Torah High School. Tarbut B'Torah High School is a Jewish community day school, K through 12. It's right down the street from UCI. Actually, fortunately, I've been shielded from much of the anti-Semitism that many of my peers face, because I go to a Jewish school. So many of my Jewish peers, go to public schools, and they face a lot more anti-Semitism because they're a minority there. At my school, Jewish is the majority because we're a Jewish school. That being said, there have been instances where we face anti-Semitism even within our gated community of Tarbut B'Torah. For example, during a boys soccer game when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, I forget if it was 8th grade or 9th grade, but the boys soccer team, they from Avalon High, they lost the game, and at the end of the game, instead of shaking hands with the Tarbut B'Torah team, they did the Hitler salute. And our security guard took them off campus, and they've been banned from coming on campus to this day. But it was a terrifying experience because, these were high school boys, the same age as us, the same background as us, and here they were performing the Hitler salute on a Jewish campus, full knowing the ramification of their actions. Another example is relating to high school students is students from Newport Harbor. They were at a party and they took red Solo cups and they arranged them in the form of a swastika for a game of beer pong. And they gathered around the swastika and they put their hands up in the Hitler salute and they took a picture. That picture went viral, of course, and everyone started commenting and getting involved. The news got involved. There were tons of punishments that were given, and discussions that were being had about what to do. And the kids were brought, the ones that wanted to TVT, to my school, and a panel was assembled of 2 seniors, and I was an 8th grader at the time, and they asked me to come speak as well on the panel. And I spoke with the kids from Newport Harbor, and I explained to them what their actions truly meant, and because I found that most of them, they knew who Hitler was, they knew what a swastika was, but they really had never seen any pictures of Jews in concentration camps or anything like that. They really didn't know what their actions meant. They were just doing it because they'd heard of it, they'd seen it, they really didn't understand. Many of them had been brought to tears when they were showed pictures by us of Jews in concentration camps in the uniforms, or wearing the yellow star, malnourished, all these things. So that was another personal experience I've had with anti-Semitism, which didn't necessarily affect me directly, but it affected the community at large. So I identify as a Jewish American male. And I've been very fortunate to have benefited from white privilege. I've also been fortunate to have been born into a family that is financially well off, enough so that I'm able to attend a private Jewish school, and I've really never wanted for anything. Anything that I need has been provided to me and given to me by my parents, by my community. That being said, I think it's very important to stay true to your identity. So, as I said, I identify as Jewish, and I used to wear a Jewish star, but I took it off a while ago because the chain broke. I didn't want to lose the Jewish star itself, but it was a gift for my bar mitzvah when I turned 13. I think that I have many friends that they hide their Jewish stars when they go out in public, that they take off their kippot when they go off in public, and I understand why they do it. I understand that sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary to hide your identity, but I think that for me personally, I will never hide my identity unless there are circumstances that I can't see, but I think it's important to be proud of who you are. And I think that by taking off your kippah, by taking off your Jewish necklace and hiding it in your shirt, that you're letting them win, that you're letting the oppressors win, because you're giving in to the fear that they're trying to cause, that they're trying to instill in you. Once I was at Cheesecake Factory eating dinner with my friend, and I normally don't wear a kippah out in public just because that's not my practice. I'll wear it when I'm praying, but not when I'm out in public necessarily. But I had a kippah in my pocket, and I put it on my head so I wouldn't lose it, and I walked out, and 3 boys started trailing me, and they started making comments about like, oh, or Jew boy, and they started mocking Hebrew, trying to speak and mock Hebrew. They started mocking Muslim culture, making noises with their mouth that were obviously attempts at mimicking prayers from the Quran, and it was uncomfortable for me. I'd never really faced something like that before, because when I walk out, no one knows that I'm Jewish unless they look closely that I'm wearing a Jewish star necklace. I never faced this at school because, as I said, I've been in a school full of Jews. As for recovery from anti-Semitic events, yes, I have recovered, and I think the community has recovered, but it's important to know that it's not necessarily a full recovery. It's not black and white. It's not, oh, I'm all better now. And it's also important to keep in mind that we don't forget this stuff. That, the incident with Avalon on our soccer field, the incident with Newport Harbor just down the street from our school, they stick with us, they stick with me, and I still think about them occasionally. I still think about, what it was like when I watched those kids perform the Hitler salute on the soccer field that I'd grown up at, that I played soccer on since I was in kindergarten, that I played frisbee on. To see them perform such a terrible action was jarring, and part of the worst part of it was not that I was scared of them doing anything then and there. I wasn't scared. We had security. I wasn't scared that they were going to attack us. I was scared because it showed that there were teens out there my age that would do such a thing, that would take such actions, and that was what scared me. And I have not recovered from that necessarily. I think that has lived with me since 8th grade, since even before. The fact that there are people out there that are not, in deep conservative areas, deeply racist areas, or deeply anti-Semitic areas. Kids here in Orange County are doing these actions, are acting in blatant anti-Semitic ways. That has stuck with me.
Hi, can you please just tell us like your name, where you're from, what you're doing in school, maybe like your involvement in the Jewish community here in Irvine?
My name is Sam Mazzo. I'm currently going to UCI for my master's in finance, and I have been an active member of Beth Jacobs Sephardi Minyan, Modern Orthodox Sephardi Minyan, since Rosh Hashanah.
And, tell us a little bit more about your involvement. Are you on any boards? Like,
I also happen to serve, I am on the board of Beth Jacobs Sephardi Minyan as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you for letting me interview you today.
Of course.
So the first question I have is, one, here in Irvine specifically, have you ever experienced any form of anti-Semitism, and tell us a little about it?
Not really. I can't really think of anything that I've experienced here in Irvine. So I guess the closest thing to an anti-Semitic experience that I've ever had was at Chapman back in 2020, before the beginning of the pandemic. And it's not what you would consider a classic anti-Semitic experience. It was a guy that was talking to, he was like, why was I wearing a kippah? And at the beginning it was very belligerent, and somehow I was able to lead the conversation away from myself and towards him and towards a completely different topic of conversation. So what could have been something that was terrible ended up being nothing really that I can describe as anti-Semitic.
And you wear a kippah around campus, is that correct?
This is correct, yes.
And how do you feel on campus wearing a kippah?
Normal, safe. I legitimately don't have any fear.
Have you had any situations where people actually came up to you like, oh, like, what is that? Like, is it cool? Like, what, are you Jewish? Tell me more about it. Like,
the exact opposite. I personally shove it in everyone's face.
But how would you say, like, the reaction is?
They think it's interesting. They think it's novel because there are not that many Jews to begin with. So,
really quickly, do you have a message for any students or people that want to know more about the community here?
All about faith. It's all about keeping your head up high, and when you are secure in your own faith, when you are part of a huge community and a very well-connected community and a caring community, you literally have nothing else to fear except for their own well-being and your own well-being as well.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us today.
My pleasure.
Hey, can you please just state your name for everyone, and would you be able to just tell me a little about your identity? Are you Jewish, American? What does that mean for you?
My name is Elijah Amirianfar. I am a graduating senior at UCI. I am Iranian Jewish living in Southern California, and I guess I'm kind of moderate in a political stance. I'm not exactly liberal, I'm not exactly conservative, I'm kind of just somewhere in the middle, maybe.
And you're Jewish, correct?
I am 100% Jewish,
okay.
Yes. I am 100% Jewish.
So, if possible, could you tell us how your identities sometimes maybe kind of conflict with anti-Semitism? Do people view you as being Jewish? Are you very open about your Judaism on campus here?
So I am very open about my Judaism on campus. I am the president for Chabad at UCI for the student union. And so I do take a lot of pride in being Jewish and, practicing my religion where I can. And I do believe that I have open conversations with people about my religion in terms of how do I pray? Because on my Instagram I'll post that I rap tefillin, and a lot of people ask me, oh my god, what is that? That's so cool. And I just tell them tefillin is what Jewish men used to pray, and it's a 5-minute thing, and you do it every day. I haven't personally been called out per se, but it's more of on my Instagram I'll post a lot of stuff that that is for the Jewish people in a way. And I have been treated differently because of that. Friends that I used to talk to stopped talking to me because of stuff that I posted. And I haven't had crazy issues with it. It is a little bit annoying, but it's not that I feel unsafe or anything on campus. Thankfully it hasn't been a huge issue for me. If anything, I've had more problems online than in person.
Can you recall any acts of anti-Semitism that you have happened to directly to you or maybe the Jewish community that you're a part of, maybe at home or here?
So I have had multiple experiences online with people being anti-Semitic to me. So I used to have a really big TikTok account a while ago, and it is now shut down because I personally took it down. But on that TikTok account, I never posted anything with Israel or about Israel-Palestine conflict or nothing about that. the only thing I had was the Israeli flag in my bio because I identify as Jewish. And even with that, I've had people in my comments saying Free Palestine, even though I never post anything about the conflict. And it's ridiculous to me how even when I'm not even saying anything, you know, people automatically want to just yell at me like Free Palestine and this and that, and it's ridiculous. And then I remember when I was a kid, around like 13 years old, I was with my mom and we were driving past one of like the Palestinian rallies in LA, and this one guy was walking across the street and he looked at me and he called me a baby killer in the car with my mom. And you know, at 13 years old, like, what the hell am I supposed to do? You know, like, that's ridiculous. And other than that, I mean, I'm pretty sure I've had other experiences, but those are the main two that I can really think of at the moment.
Hi, so could you please just tell us who you are, what's your name, what's your major, you know, maybe a couple fun facts about yourself just to say hi to everyone.
Sure. My name is Nova. I'm a first year. I'm currently like officially undeclared, but I'm trying to double major in software engineering and international studies with Jewish studies minor, and I like fencing, and I think that's it.
The question I have is, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism? And, you know, what was that like for you? Again, if you haven't experienced, also, that's totally fair.
I haven't personally experienced anti-Semitism on campus. I have friends who experience anti-Semitism. I mean, if you include the apartheid week, I would say, yeah, I did, I guess. But individually, no.
Would you say that your identity as a Jewish person has ever caused any problems, maybe for you or your family? Maybe are there any examples of that? You know, again, because you identify as Jewish and you're very open about it, right? A lot of people probably know that you are Jewish. And how has that affected you just as a person?
So I think like definitely because I am very like openly Jewish and I'm mostly like in the Jewish community, like I don't really know what people think, or like I don't really I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't experience anti-Semitism. But my experience was being Jewish, like definitely because I was living in Turkey. I lived in Turkey for like 13 years of my life. I moved to the US like 7 years ago, and I was not like openly like Jewish there, and it was I would say generally very anti-Semitic environment, definitely like very, yeah, anti-Zionist, but definitely very anti-Semitic. And I've had friends, I mean, it was just a norm for people to be anti-Semitic. So not like many of my friends that knew that I was Jewish. And then like my mom had still has like identity problems because it's seen as a like usually like a shameful thing being like Jewish. So definitely I was not very like confident. But after I came to the US, or like my last years in like Turkey, not really.